Garden pots, troughs and window boxes and all sorts of container gardens make such a difference to your winter garden, because often they give you colour and structure when everything else is more or less dormant. So to answer some common questions on winter container gardens and to help you choose some brilliant combinations for your winter pots, I went to our local plant nursery with cookery writer and influencer Jane Beedle, who's also a garden designer. I'll put links to Jane Beedle's Jane Bee Bakes and to any other resources we mention in the description below. And if you're new here, the Middle-Sized Garden uploads weekly with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. So if you'd like to see the videos when you open up YouTube, then tap the subscribe button. They're free. So now let's look at the plants you've chosen and why you've chosen them. We were going around the nursery earlier and you very much chose perennials, not plants that were made for bedding pots and things like that, but perennials that could go into the garden later. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, the problem is with a lot of the plants that you get to this time of year for, in theory, winter bedding, like winter flowering pansies, I find they don't actually flower until next spring, so they can sit there and look a bit sad, really. So, and you chuck them out, don't you, once you've emptied your boxes. So because things don't grow as fast in the winter, you need to pack them pretty close together, because otherwise they'll never develop like for summer bedding. But you can go in for things that you wouldn't normally dream to put in a window box, because it's not going to get any bigger. As long as it fits now, it'll still be fitting in it all right in the spring. And then rather than waste it, pop it in your garden, or if you haven't got room for everything you've got in your window boxes, then give it to friends. So Alexandra, I think you will be the beneficiary of some of the things next spring.
And so what did you choose?
I always tend to go for the same old things when I'm doing my winter boxes. It's always a bit of greenery and usually some cyclamen or something like that. But I've just come across this wonderful Cornus. So it's Cornus Alba Sibirica with these fantastically Christmassy red stems that are far too big for a window box under normal circumstances. But for the winter, it's not going to put on any growth and it looks splendid. So, and it can go in the garden afterwards, of course. And then there are these lovely little Festuca glauca, lovely blue. Well, they're not technically grass, it's a sedge, but it is rather beautiful and perfect for going in the winter box. And look at those, they look so wintry and gorgeous and completely different from what I normally do. So I'm really quite excited about this. I'm pretty sure that'll fit in the middle of a big window box. It won't go into my little ones, but a couple of those in the front window I think will look absolutely gorgeous. Perhaps then with the standby cyclamens just to add a little bit of extra. But I think this is going to be the theme for this year. So the great thing about winter window boxes is they don't need much work over the winter because they don't grow very much. As a consequence, you need to pack them pretty tightly, otherwise they're just going to look a bit dull. And that can be expensive, but you can go for these wonderful packs and you get some great varieties. Look, these lovely little red ones and a bit of Choisya yellow ones, which in the garden would get this sort of size. And these will keep going and keep interest right the way through until you want to do your summer pots. Even if you just don't put in, if you don't want yellow, you don't put in the yellow one, just stick it in another pot and plant it out in the garden next year. But they won't be wasted and they look absolutely gorgeous. And this is a little leucothoe scarletta. And how Christmassy is that? It looks beautiful. You just need to find something to go with it now. But so just another thought, and because it's winter and it's Christmas and it's holly and ivy and all that stuff, there are some beautiful little hollies here. Now this doesn't go with the colours that I'm choosing, but it could go with lots of wonderful things. It's beautiful holly. This one particularly hasn't got any sharp bits, so it's a very it's Ilex Golden King, which isn't prickly, and that surrounded by some other lovely colours would be beautiful in your window box, and then stick it out in the garden next year. You can topiarise it if you're worried about it getting too big once it's got mature in the garden, but that's a splendid thing, isn't it, for £7.50. Stick it in the middle of a window box and then build up some things around it. Gorgeous. I probably wouldn't go for a little sharp holly like this, because frankly there's not a huge amount of interest in that for the winter. Lovely in the garden, but probably not in your window box. And similarly, this little one as well, it won't have much interest in it, but something like that, or they haven't got any here, but one with a white or a cream variegation would be splendid too. So don't discard anything for a window box. What you're looking for is something that'll keep looking good right the way through until the spring, and that holly will certainly do that. I was totally seduced by these beautiful red stemmed Cornus Alba Sibirica, and I like to have something with a bit of height in the centre of my window boxes and actually my containers as well. So I'm going to use this for the main structural feature, and this will look gorgeous right through actually to the spring, even when it starts throwing out some new growth. So these are going to go into the centre of the boxes. So you wouldn't normally think to buy such a big shrub to go into a window box, but actually it doesn't take up too much space, and it's not going to do any growing really during the dormant period. So I'm going to put some bulbs in the base, not too many. Make sure I plant them the right way up. Be interesting to see what they look like. They're quite nice firm little bulbs. I know it's quite hard to find bulbs at this time of the year. There we go. And then another little layer of compost. And now I'm going to start thinking about how I'm going to compose all these lovely plants in the window box. So first of all, my beautiful little Festuca glauca. See, they're tiny, so they're really good to go into a window box. And I want them to nestle nicely up to the corners, because you want them to try and soften the base of this plant. So I'm going to tuck it in as close as I can to the cornice and nestle those in there. Put your plants in before you've fully topped up your soil, because otherwise you've just got to dig holes in the soil and you can fill in around them. So I'm going to put 4 in here to soften this bare base of the cornus. And look, if you can fluff them out so you can't really see where that the top of that root ball was. And then I've got these absolutely stunning little hellebores. They're called silver dollar, and they look really wintry and slightly frosted with these delicate little slightly pink flowers. So I'm going to put these in. And these, of course, will go into the garden beautifully next year. If you can get them out of the pot this year, that is. And of course, these hellebores will also get reasonably big next year. So they will fill a nice shady spot in the garden. What a lovely little wintry picture that is. So that looks gorgeous. I'm just going to fill in around those a bit now while I've got a little bit of space. With some soil. And then, just because I absolutely love them, look at that. Not quite red, not quite pink, just gorgeous. We tried them out in the trolley in the nursery, and they were the ones I fell in love with. So I'm going to put in 4 of these in the big boxes, because I think I really just like that little pop of colour. And then don't forget, put them on your windowsill before you water them, because they will be really heavy by the time you've got the water in there.
So what about the pots themselves? I mean, do we need to worry, because it's winter and it could be very cold, do we need to actually worry about what the pots are made of?
You don't want things that are going to get too cold, but really, metal gets cold, but metal gets hot. Terracotta's not bad, but of course it has to be frostproof terracotta. But when you think the roots of the plants are going to be up against a very thin wall, so I would say rather than the pots, it's more important to pick plants that are going to survive a very, very cold winter. And of course, if it's going to be very, very cold, don't overwater, because very often it's the roots in a soggy and cold and frozen soil that does for the plant. If they're cold, they survive much better than being wet and cold.
What do you do about the soil or the compost in the pots when you're doing your winter pots? Do you always change it?
When I cleared out the old bedding plants that were in there, the small boxes that go on my side windows were very dry and very compacted, and the trouble is with a potting compost, once it's dry, it's very hard to get it rehydrated. So I had to get all that out. I'm not chucking it away, I'm just going to put it on my border. The organic matter will help any soil. And my bigger window boxes, once I'd got the top layer off, actually the bottom layer of soil wasn't too bad, and the roots hadn't got right the way down into it. Because your plants don't need quite so much of anything in the winter because they're not really growing, I took a view and left about a quarter of the soil in my window boxes that hadn't got roots and things in, and then I'm just going to top those up.
But if you've got any sign of any nasties in there, you have to take the whole lot out, is that right?
Absolutely. Well, it depends on what you think is nasty. I think vine weevil is nasty. You've got vine weevil if you go to pull a plant up and there are no roots on there because the little grubs have eaten all the roots. Now, I had that in a pot, but I'm not convinced it wasn't just due to neglect and the poor thing just shriveled and died because I didn't water it from late summer, or whether it's got vine weevil. So we're going to have a little look. But if you do get vine weevil, I tell you what a really good thing to do. So in the past, I've spread out my vine weevily soil with these delicious little grubs in, and the sparrows and robins just come down and eat them all. So it's quite good for the wildlife as well, really.
It's a great natural pest control.
It is a very great natural pest control.
And what about feeding and watering pots? Do you actually feed or water pots in the winter, or do you really let them just be?
Well, it really does depend on how dry the winter is, how much you water it, but really they don't need watering very much at all. As I said earlier, the last thing you want is them to be very, very soggy. So keep an eye on them. If I water them once a month in the middle of winter, that's probably quite a lot. Just occasionally just feel to see how wet the soil is. And feeding, well, I am putting in new compost, certainly at the top layer on my two big boxes. There's a lot of nutrients already in that compost, so we've used peat-free, loam-based compost. I would say I never ever feed my winter pots. I think occasionally will hear people say that they do, but really I don't think it's necessary, to be perfectly honest. But if you're desperate to feed, very little, and maybe once a month, once every 6 weeks. But once you've got new compost, you really don't need to.
And if you'd like more tips and ideas for your container gardens and pots, then there's a Container Gardens playlist at the end of this video. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.